Thanks, Jamie, and good evening, everyone. Thanks very much for coming out. It's a very interesting topic, and I'm not surprised at all to see quite a good turnout here. It's been one of those weeks that you know that when the world is feeling pain, there's probably a reason behind it. And particularly as far as Christadelphians go, this one has been really exciting because it's really honed in on an area of the world where the Bible does reveal quite a bit of Bible prophecy. As Josh said, on Thursday, our time, on June the 23rd, everything was, I guess, in anticipation as Europe was, or the UK was about to vote as far as whether they would remain in the EU, the European Union, or not. And you can see there that the initial polls before the vote actually happened had the people believing, and the Prime Minister and his government, no doubt, believing that the vote from the people would be to remain in the EU. However, they weren't without realism, knowing that the vote for leaving wasn't very far behind either. The big question is what would happen. And as our chairman said, the newspapers really were taken by storm. Headlines such as New Britain and Brexit earthquake. Shocks, what will we do? Left the people almost bemused that the result had gone the way it had. You read a lot of the news articles on the web and there's a lot of people that were surprised. They didn't really think that their vote to leave would actually mean that they would leave. They just thought that it would probably be a statement to the government that they weren't happy with the way the EU was suppressing the UK. But leave it did become. 51.8% voting to leave the EU, 48.1% voting to remain. The fallout is still happening dramatically. Boris Johnson hails the glorious opportunity of Brexit as David Cameron resigns. They really were the two figureheads, I guess, that stood up in this campaign. A campaign that's probably been going on for a number of months in Australia. We've probably been sheltered from it because it doesn't politically directly affect us, at least we didn't think it would. And these two individuals, Boris Johnson, who was an MP, and David Cameron, were pushing their sides of the argument as figureheads. I guess there was many others as well. David Cameron, the PM of England, who was promoting that they should remain in the EU, and this Boris Johnson, who probably is a little bit of an enigmatic character, was really pushing the opportunity that Britain did have if they left the EU to build new trade ties and to grow. Opportunity, he was painting it as. And the PM of the UK, David Cameron, resigned. And so suddenly we have one of the most powerful countries in the world without a leader as of October, with a major political change as far as trade ties go, separating themselves from Europe. Europe's response was immediate. EU leaders called for UK to leave as soon as possible, because it wasn't so much just the pain that this was going to cause and is going to cause to the UK, but it's the pain that's going to cause to the EU, the European Union. As now suddenly there's a number of nations that are saying, well, maybe we should have such a referendum as well, seeing this as an opportunity to opt out. And the EU really wanting to consolidate what they've got, to see who will stand with them and their ideas. As it says there in that article, any delay to Britain's exit would unnecessarily prolong uncertainty. This is an unprecedented situation, but we're united in our response. Immediately, around the world, the economies of the different nations plummeted. And particularly there we've got a graph of Britain, and they've got the pound falling by 11%. And then there's this confusion. As Josh was saying, like a confusion as almost to what have we done? And interesting as some of the websites are saying that one of the most Googled things at the moment from the UK is, what is the EU? It's almost like people have voted not really realising the implications of what was going to happen. And as of today, there's been a petition calling for a second vote to vote again as to whether we've done the right thing. It's quite interesting, isn't it? It's a nation of uncertainty. But when we get to a nation of uncertainty, we have to wonder, and it's such a big event in the world, we have to wonder how God is involved. And is he involved? To challenge ourselves to go to the book where he's revealed his plan with this earth, and to see if there are any directions and things that can open up our understanding of this. So what I want to start just by looking at is the blueprint of Bible prophecy, because I think it's important, particularly if you're not familiar with Bible prophecy, that we get a big picture that as Christadelphians, the way we look at these events and what we're looking for. And the blueprint that we've chosen to look at is from Daniel 2. But before we look at Daniel 2, which we just had read, there's this quote here from Isaiah 46, which hones in about what we're being challenged when we talk about God and the Word of God, and whether it's prophesying things which are going to happen in the future, and if it does accurately, what that means to us. And so God says in Isaiah 46, he says, remember the former things of old. Don't forget history. Remember it. For I am a God and there is none else. I am God, there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning. I can tell you what will happen at the end, before the beginnings even happened. From ancient times, the things that are not yet done. Go back as far as you can think. Take the books and read further. And I'll be declaring what will happen with those nations far in advance in time as to where the articles are being written. My counsel shall stand. I will do all my pleasure. There's a definitency about it, isn't there? There's a challenge. That if I can foretell the future, then there's a challenge for you to accept that God is in control. And as Christadelphians, we come with that heartfelt belief. And what we've just had here depicted to us in Daniel chapter 2 is a piece of history which has been recorded about the time of 605 BC, somewhere around that sort of period of time, by a man named Daniel, who was a Jew who was in captivity in Babylon. And the king of Babylon at the time, Nebuchadnezzar, had a dream. And it seems that this king Nebuchadnezzar was a man who had imperial ambition. There was no doubt about it when you read in the history books about Nebuchadnezzar. He expanded his empire. And as a king, he would sit back and envisage his empire growing and the strength of his empire. But on this occasion, his dream was manipulated by God. And his thoughts went far beyond what it was as a conquering soldier. And it turned into this terrible dream in which he saw an image grow before him and then be crushed down by a stone power. And the challenge was put out to all the wise men in Babylon at the time to tell me what the dream was that I'd had. I'm not going to tell you what the dream is. You come to me and tell me what the dream was. And then when I'm satisfied that you have the power to tell me that, then tell me the interpretation of that dream. And Daniel, as we just read, came before the king. He didn't claim in any way that this was his power or his ability as a soothsayer to understand, but rather in verse 28 that we've just read, that there's a God in heaven that reveals secrets, and he will make known the interpretation of this dream. So his witness was back to the God of heaven, just like us tonight. We're saying that the Bible has got this evidence within it that can show how the Brexit is a part of God's bigger plan with this earth. And so he saw a head of gold, which Daniel defined as, you, King Nebuchadnezzar, are that head of gold. And he went on to describe a number of kingdoms, it says in verse 39, that would follow after him. And of course, this was a shock to the king, wasn't it? Because, I mean, as a king, as an imperial, ambitious individual, he didn't want to see the end of his kingdom. And yet here was a man who was coming before the superior authority of the time, prepared to tell him that his kingdom was going to pass away. His kingdom would be overcome by another kingdom, a kingdom of silver, a kingdom that was depicted by two arms, but that would end up joining back together. History shows us that it was the Medes and the Persians which combined together to overthrow the empire of Babylon. And then that empire, when it come together as the Persian Empire, itself was overcome by an empire of brass. History shows us that it was the Greek Empire, led by Alexander the Great, a vast empire. History then goes on to show that another empire of iron came and overcame the Greek Empire. And it got to the legs of that image, where it divided into two. And it represents the Roman Empire, which divided into two parts, the East and the West. And tonight that's going to become interesting as we look at Bible prophecy and the events that we've seen with the Brexit and the confusion in the EU. Legs which, as part of our body goes, are quite long. An empire which was far longer in time than any of the three empires that preceded it. An empire which continues to have influence today in world nations. How can we say that? Well, because when we got to the feet of that empire, the iron that constituted the legs of that image was still found amongst the feet. Feet that was an unusual mixture, a mixture of clay and iron. Doesn't join together, doesn't adhere. One is brittle and weak, described as the seed of men, there in verse 43. The other is still the hard iron of the Roman Empire, military strength. Today, we see a divided Europe. We see many nations. The Western Roman Empire was overcome by the Goths and divided into 10 different divisions. Seems to line up with the 10 toes. But that will continue in our story as we look further at Bible prophecy. The main thing that we want to get out of this image is actually the stone power at the end. Because this is the blueprint of Bible prophecy. All Bible prophecy points towards this conclusion. A stone which will come. A stone which will come and will crush the powers and the empires of men. A stone which will grow into a great mountain and fill the whole earth. If you turn over to verse 44 there of Daniel 2, that stone is defined as the God of heaven, the kingdom of the God of heaven, a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. It shall not be left to any other people or empires after it. No, it shall stand forever. And so what we've seen there in a blueprint of Bible prophecy is that the main purpose of God, the end point of all prophecies of God, is a kingdom which will fill the earth and will stand forever. And that kingdom is his kingdom. Not the kingdoms of men, but his kingdom. So when we step back and we look at Bible prophecy, I want you to see like we do, that the God of heaven literally is holding this earth in his hands with a sure purpose, a purpose that will see his kingdom fill it, his purpose fill it, people that love him inhabit it. And this is consistent. Here's a number of quotes just to show this consistency. In Acts 17 verse 29, for as much then as we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that God is like unto gold or silver or stone. Don't think of God as an idol. Don't think of him as something that doesn't do anything. No, think of him as a living, breathing being that has a purpose with this earth. Because God's appointed a day in which he will judge this world in righteousness by that man who he hath ordained. There's a day when God will judge this earth. There's a day when that stone power will come and it will crush the kingdoms of men. There's a day when his kingdom will be set up and he's ordained a man that will rule over that. That man is defined for us there as one that he has raised from the dead. The Bible witnesses to that man being Jesus Christ. 2 Peter 3, there shall come in the last days scoffers walking after their own lusts, saying, where's the promise of his coming? Since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they have before the beginning of creation. Don't be fooled by that. Don't be fooled by the fact that this world scoff at the return of Christ. that they scoff at the fact that this world's systems of men might be overcome and changed. Now don't doubt the fact that the Lord is not slack concerning his promise. He hasn't forgotten his purpose. Now there's a day when he will send his Son, and that day will come as a thief in the night. Isaiah 2 verse 2 to 4, an Old Testament prophecy, speaks of nations coming up to the mountain of Yahweh, to his house to worship him. It's a time of joy, it's a time of desire, where people want to come to God and to learn of him and to worship him. You see there, he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths, for out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem. There will be a time when God's kingdom will be set up, focused on Jerusalem. And his laws and his purpose and his governing and his statutes and his moral teaching will come out of that place, and it will change the world. And the words of Jesus Christ himself: of the day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so also shall the coming of the Son of Man be. There will be a day. He will come. It'll be days that are like the days of Noah, where they were eating, drinking, marrying, giving in marriage, enjoying life, and overtaken by life. Watch therefore, for you know not the hour when your Lord doth come. There's a warning, isn't there? Don't get taken away by this world thinking that it's permanent. No, there's a definite day coming when the stone power will come and God will set up his kingdom that will fill the earth. So that's the blueprint of Bible prophecy. As Christadelphians, when we look at Bible prophecy, that's the end point. That's the vision that we can see in the end. And everything fits within that blue point. So then now we come to the Brexit and the EU. I said to a friend of mine, when the Brexit happened, everyone got interested as to what would happen in the UK. And I said, well, as Christadelphians, we probably look straight at Europe. Because there's so much more in Bible prophecy about the nations in Europe as far as the end times than Britain per se. But there are a number of instances and mentions of Britain, but it's how Britain then ties in with Europe that becomes interesting as far as Bible prophecy. Well, the history of Brexit. The European Union is really something that was sprouted out of World War II. After World War II, as you can imagine, there was a lot of extreme nationalism between the countries of Europe, and the idea was to try and or to institute an antidote to that nationalism, to try and make nations work together. And in 1952 they created what was called the European Coal and Steel Community. It was declared as the first step in the Federation of Europe, to make nations work together with their economies, to actually talk with each other over the table, to try and break down the frostiness of two world wars. And that continued on. In 1957 it became the Common Market, the Economic Community. It was finally called in 1993 the European Union, as we know it today. But the significant point there is in 1973 that Britain joined the Economic Community. It began there in Europe, where the world wars had been fought. In 1973, Britain itself joined the Economic Community. It was actually a time which Christadelphians were quite taken aback with in many ways, because in our understanding of Bible prophecy, we always saw that and thought that Britain would remain separate from Europe. But it was a challenge to us in our faith. And so many faithful brethren have been wondering when Britain would withdraw their support from the EU. And so the vote on Thursday was remarkable for many of the older generation that were around when Britain actually went into the EU, to see it actually pull out just as we believed it would happen. You can see there that the popularity of the EU has grown over the years. So now there's 28 different nations, member states in the EU, that all work together for the purpose of what the EU stands for. What is the purpose? Well, here's 5 points that really show the purpose of the European Union. You see up in the top corner there, there's like it sort of stops halfway, it didn't quite render, but there's a building of the wall around the zone of the EU, those 28 different nations. Those 28 different nations are working together to promote economic and social progress, to speak for the European Union on the international scene, make itself bigger as far as dealing with other nations. The EU's work to introduce European citizenship so that as nations there's this freedom between each other to work together. They've developed Europe as an area of freedom, security and justice, providing protection, security and sharing information as far as, particularly in the last few years, terrorism and people on different lists about that have got history. And they maintain and build on established EU laws. So they build laws. The interesting thing about the EU is that it's based in Brussels. It actually has a leadership. It actually employs about 40,000 bureaucrats. It's a huge business. And it runs to keep that wall and to build that wall around the EU nations to help them economically. And it works. You can see here, as far as populations in millions, that the EU is, while it's a big population, it's a lot less than China, it's a lot less than India. When it comes to surface area, you can see that it hasn't got huge amounts of area that it can use to grow and to produce things for trade. But when it binds together as a trading partner of 28 different nations, it can bring in a GDP, or a gross domestic product, that's the biggest in the world. And that was its ideal, that they could work together as nations to become a force together to economically succeed. But that, of course, has its costs. And that's where the UK referendum comes to the play, because the costs that the British people could see they were getting out of the EU, many people didn't feel were valid. And so those who are in favour of a British withdrawal from the European Union, commonly referred to as the Brexit, or the British exit from the EU, argue that the EU has a democratic deficit and that being a member undermines national sovereignty. While those who favour membership argue that in a world with many supranational nations, any loss of sovereignty is compensated by the benefits of EU membership. So at the fundamental heart of the EU referendum, the Brexit, was the feeling of the British people that their ability to make decisions and to lead and to guide their own destiny was being limited by the governing bureaucracy of the EU. And so those who wanted to leave the EU said, look, if we leave, it will allow UK to better control immigration. In the last couple of years, immigration has been a major, major problem because of the wars in Syria and around there. But it will allow us to make our own rules on immigration rather than forcing a quota of people into our population that will take jobs away from our own people, and we'll lose control by being forced on us. It will save us billions in EU membership fees. If I go back to this little depiction here, I know it's very small, but this is the fees that the 28 different member states pay into the EU. Germany is up the top there. It pays about 6.5 billion euros a year to be a part of the EU. The UK is second on that list. It pays 4.5 billion euros to be a part of the EU. These are what you would say are the strong nations of the EU. These are the weak. They're being supported by the money that's being paid into the EU by these richer countries. So the UK is right up the top as far as what they're putting in. What the people were believing is that what they're actually getting back wasn't actually lining up with what they were putting in. We could save billions of dollars in EU membership fees and allow the UK to make its own trade deals and free the UK from EU regulations and bureaucracy that's seen as just a needless cost. It was interesting to watch a number of different videos on how people viewed the EU. When they were asked who led the EU in Britain, no one knew. Now, no one knew the individuals. They showed photos to people and they said, "Do you know who this is?" And they said, "No, never seen him." So they thought, all right, we'll try this test to be fair. We'll leave Britain and we'll go to Brussels. We'll go to the headquarters of the EU. And we'll show exactly the same pictures to the people in the street. "Do you know who this man is?" "No, never seen him." "Do you know who this woman is?" "No, never seen her." Well, they're actually the heads of the EU who are actually making the laws who determine how you live. They determine the products that you buy. They determine the people that you can trade with. They determine your whole economic wealth as a country. And you don't even know who they are. And more than that, you don't even have a vote or a say to be able to depose them in any way. And the Brits felt that they had lost control of their own sovereignty, their own destiny. Those who remained, those said, "Look, if we leave, we're going to risk the UK's prosperity. We'll diminish our influence over the world affairs. We'll jeopardise national security. Will result in trade barriers between the UK and the EU, and it will lead to job losses. That's why we don't want to leave." Well, on the other side of the channel, on the day of the vote, this is what was being portrayed on so many different significant buildings in the European zone. Support for Britain. The EU didn't want the UK to leave either. They desperately know how much she puts into their economy. They know the figurehead that she is. But it didn't happen that way, did it? There was a mixture of different headaches, of different headings, should I say. I think that one probably, though I wouldn't use the words, describes it perfectly as to how the UK people feel now. What happens now? Where do we go? It's fine to have this ambition of going forward and taking hold of the direction of our nation ourselves, but how are we going to do it? It's been 44 years that we've been a part of this group of nations. That's longer than I've been alive. I haven't known anything different other than Britain tied into the EU economy. So let's have a look then at the Bible's prophetic expectations for Europe. Turn with me to Daniel chapter 7. We've just read Daniel 2, which is really the basis and the blueprint of a number of prophecies in the book of Daniel. You remember there how we spoke about the legs that were made of iron, and it ended up in feet of iron and clay. Well, here in Daniel chapter 7, the vision is different. Daniel 7 verse 1, it shows that this was a dream that Daniel had. It wasn't a dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. It's a dream that God gave to Daniel the prophet. It was a dream, therefore, that God designed. It was God's vision of the kingdoms of men, how he saw them. He saw them as 4 different beasts, verse 3. They came out of the sea. The first was like a lion, verse 4, had eagle's wings. Another beast came up that was like a bear, verse 5, had 3 ribs in its mouth. The fourth, in verse 6, was like a leopard, had 4 wings and 4 heads of dominion. But it wasn't that one that was the interest of this prophecy. It was the next beast in verse 7. After this, I saw in night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth. And that should ring bells back to the legs of iron on Daniel's image. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it. It was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Now the 10 horns should ring an echo to the 10 toes as well. Verse 8, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. So here we have a different vision, but it's still speaking about the empires, the same empires which we looked at in Daniel's image. The lion representing Babylon, the bear representing the Medo-Persians. Lopsided because the Medes were weaker than what the Persians were. The Grecian Empire with the wings and the speed of Alexander the Great that divided itself into the 4 generals of Alexander the Great. But this fourth beast was terrible. It destroyed like none of the other beasts. It stamped down. It was strong exceedingly. But when that beast, the vision changed the view from looking at the beast to the horns on the head, interesting things started to happen. 10 horns, 3 were plucked up, and a new horn came up that had a mouth that spoke great things. The interesting thing about these horns, if we continue reading through, is they get to a point of history where they come face to face with the stone power. Look with me in verse, or read in verse 20, verse 19. I would know, this is Daniel wanting to understand the vision, I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron, his nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. And I want to know of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth, and spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellow. I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints, and prevailed against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints should possess the kingdom. So there's our stone. We know that. The stone set up a kingdom that would last forever. These horn powers continue on until the stone time, especially this unique horn that's got a mouth. That mouth, if you look in verse 25, shall speak great things against the Most High, against God, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High. That mouth was going to come head to head with God, and he was going to speak against God, but he was going to be crushed. It's interesting, isn't it? Well, if we look at prophecy, we see that the western part of the Empire of Rome was overcome by 10 different tribes. 10 different Gothic tribes. The Huns, the Vandals, the Visigoths, etc., down the right there. The interesting thing is that the British Isles were not a part of the Goths that overtook the Roman Empire. What does that mean? Well, it means that they didn't continue on the characteristic of this beast. Unlike these areas here that were taken over by the Goths, they continued on the spirit of this beast in the 10 horns. But the British Isles didn't. They were separate. If you turn with me to Revelation chapter 17, now we go from a prophecy and a prophet that was speaking around the time of BC 600. We come now to prophecies that were given to the Apostle John about AD 100, so a period of 700 years different. But you would expect that there would be some similarities if this prophecy, biblical prophecy, is being given by God, the same God, to reveal things to his servants, to the saints. And we find that, exactly that, in Revelation chapter 17. You read from verse 1. There came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. So we've got a picture of a woman who is a whore, a harlot. She sits upon many waters, typical of many nations in influence. Verse 2, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So this whore, this woman, this harlot, has influence on the kings of the earth and also influence on the people of the earth. Her wine or her teaching. It influences both the people and the ruling powers. So he carried me away, verse 3, in the spirit in the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon the scarlet-coloured beast, full of names of blasphemy, and having 7 heads and, echo, 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet coloured and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. She was wealth. And in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. Upon her forehead was a name, Mystery Babylon, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. See, verse 6, again, is echoes to Daniel 7. This woman is drunk with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus, people who had died for Christ's sake, people who are true believers, who are saints, just like in Daniel 7. Daniel 7, the beast was wearing down the saints. Well, here we've got a woman who is drunk with the blood of the saints. She's riding a beast, as we got up there on the PowerPoint. They had 10 horns, which were representing, again, 10 kings. Had 7 different heads, forms of rulership and government. But she was in control. Who is this beast? Who is this woman? Well, come over with me to verse 12. The 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings which have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. So these 10 horns, even though they're 10 kings, don't really rule. It's a really unusual form of rulership, isn't it? But they get power from the beast. They get power from this ruling dominion, because they've got like-mindedness. Verse 14, when they're together with this power, they make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb overcomes them. This is the stone. The Lamb in Revelation is the Lord Jesus Christ. He's Lord of lords, King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. So here is the beast again, coming to the blueprint of history that we spoke about at the start. The stone power. We've got 10 kings who are bound together and given power without really having power themselves. And we have a woman who is like a horn with the mouth, but it's a woman who has the influence over the kings and over the people of the earth. You know, history would show the influence of the Roman Catholic Church to fit the figure of that horn and its influence in political powers perfectly. The early church in the Roman Empire had no real power until the time of Constantine. Constantine used Christianity as his vehicle to get political strength about 312 or 321 AD. That has carried on in different manners. It's ebbed and flowed in different ways, but it's carried on to today. Today, here we've got the picture of the current Pope, Pope Francis, mixing with the rulers of this world. Vladimir Putin, Barack Obama. Pope Francis, 2015, is largely popular around the world. He is most popular in Europe, where 84% of people view him favourably. About 35% of the population of Europe today is Catholic. Obviously, there are those without belief and there's those with other doctrines. But how entwined is the Roman Catholics with the EU? Well, this is amazing. According to the EU's Copenhagen criteria, which defines that states are eligible to join the EU, a candidate state must be a free market democracy. Given that the Holy See is a theocracy, i.e. follows God, it doesn't meet the criteria. However, as it's so small and surrounded by the EU state Italy, it's intrinsically linked to the EU. Vatican City has an open border with the EU and intends to join the information system. It also uses the euro as its sole currency and has an agreement with the EU allowing them to mint their own coins. Not even Britain took on the euro as its own form of currency. It's got the pound. And so, as far as this Brexit goes, when Britain separates from Europe, it's got its own currency already. That shows you how entwined the Vatican actually is with the EU, that it's taken on the euro. It's taken on the currency of the beast. It's linked with the EU. So, is it interesting then that when we talk about these 10 kings who have this woman riding upon her, which is prophetically being shown as the Roman Catholic system, who is able to influence the kings, who is able to teach to the people its doctrines, that these 10 kings are really showing the powers in Europe. Today it's manifested in the face of the EU. But we're going to show you soon that the nations of the EU aren't necessarily the only ones that will be involved in this conglomeracy of kings that will come head to head with the stone power with Christ at the end times. But where does Britain stand with this? Well, this slide shows a number of things. Firstly, in 2004, there was a meeting held in Rome to establish a constitution for the EU, to bring a number of different documents together under one piece of paper effectively. What this will mean is that the national parliaments will be reduced to a little more than city councils. So it was a document that would say, look, sign this constitution that you will work underneath the bureaucracy and the lawmakers and the civil rights of the EU. And we'll look after that for all the nations that are within us. But what that would do is take all of that work away from the individual nations. So suddenly, rather than Britain and the UK having their own set of laws to look after various things, now they would be bound together with the whole EU. So it would mean that the national parliaments will basically be reduced a little more than the city councils looking after roads and basic, issues of immediacy. Now this will suit many EU countries because they're part of the Roman beast system, and historically they've been more accustomed to having their affairs directed from the upper class. Go back into the Dark Ages where the Roman Catholic system and the rulers pushed down onto the lower classes. Well, they were happy with that. But Prime Minister Blair signed up to this treaty, and the repercussions within the people were significant. They felt that Blair had surrendered Britain to Europe, that they had literally given over the independency of Britain, or the UK, to the beast, to Europe. Well, let's just have a look at something here. I want to develop a little bit more on this patriotism of Britain. Why is there this patriotism or this separation from Europe within UK culture? Well, here's a classic song. I'm going to play it shortly. Hopefully it will work. There's a number of things about Europe which I've never really appreciated. But you just see all these royal events that happen. You see a wedding or a coronation or the Queen's 90th birthday or whatever it is, and you just see people flock out into the streets to watch this pageantry. But tied with that is a lot of music. Now, this symbol here has carried through a number of world wars, and prior to that, even in earlier times. It's a symbol of Britannia. The song that we've got there is actually from a poem called Rule Britannia. And when you look at the words of this, you really start to feel what was in the history of England and the UK. Rule Britannia, rule the waves. Britons never will be slaves. And that is the refrain. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times in that song. See, if you want to get the message across, you make it a refrain, don't you? Rule Britannia, rule the waves, Britain never will be slaves. We'll be an island, we'll look after ourselves, and we'll never come underneath another country's domination. You'll recognise the song as soon as I play it. And hopefully it will work. Look at that picture there. There it is, Hyde Park in London. The City Hall in Belfast. You can't really see it, I'm sorry, but all you can see is there's crowds of people there, isn't there? Glasgow, Green, Scotland. This is the proms, the last night of the proms. Classic repertoire of songs that are always played. One of them is Rule Britannia. That was broadcasted across the different parts of the United Kingdom. And there they are in their masses out in the parks singing along to this song. I've never seen anything like that in Australia. I mean, this is patriotism. This is the heart of the kingdom. And they're all singing this song, Rule Britannia. We will never be slaves. To thee belongs the rural reign. Thy cities shall commerce shine. All thine shall be subject reign, and every shall be circle thine. Well, this has its hearts in an empire that went out and explored the world. Its hearts in an empire that has got far more influence than just over its own isles. It's got its hearts in an empire that believes that it is the head of something far greater. Well, an interesting thing about this Brexit vote is that when you look at the age demographics of who voted to remain and who voted to leave, the younger ones, underneath 50, and as you go younger, even stronger, voted that they wanted to remain. They wanted to remain with the EU. They've known no different. But they can see the benefits of travel. They can see the excitement of having jobs on the mainland, all these sorts of things. But it's the older people where the vote swung. They wanted to leave. They're the ones that have this nationalistic pride and spirit that they believe that Britain should be standing alone, making its own rules, and being its own individual, being its own ruler, being its own empire. They're the ones that really have swung this decision. Well, if you go a little bit of history and you look at the battle for Britain, and you say battle for Britain, this is in a write-up in The Sun, which is a newspaper over there, about the same time, 2004, when Tony Blair signed that treaty. It spoke about a number of different events where Europe had tried to pull back the UK. And in this little article it says, look, they always want us to come back. Ever since we've separated, they've wanted us to come back. What was the separation? Well, ever since the Bible was translated into English, exposing the fraudulent Church of Rome, and thus launching the Reformation in England, 1529 AD, has been a consistent and unremitting attempt to turn back the clock, to return the country to papal domination. So at the heart of wanting to bring England back to the EU was the fact that, well, England stood apart from the Roman Catholic Church and exposed it for the Dark Ages and the persecution that was bringing upon the poor. He stepped away from that. Our King James Bible is a result of that Reformation. But ever since then, Europe has wanted to bring it back. The beast, the Roman Catholics have wanted to bring it back under its domination. So there's a number of incidences which probably the older ones here are more familiar with than me, but the Spanish Armada, where the Spanish sent a whole fleet over towards the UK to gain to capture it, basically, to take it over and to destroy its powers, to take it as its own. The Napoleonic Wars, where the Holy Roman Empire was overcome, but British stood firm, and Napoleon couldn't get into Britain. 1823, the Gunpowder Plot, which most of us will probably know Guy Fawkes Day, but in 1823, King James, who authorised or helped with the Bible to be translated into English, the plot was to blow him sky high and all the Houses of Parliament in the UK, in England, and to put in his place a Catholic queen. They believed they could set up his daughter who had the association towards the Catholic, to put her up so they could get the domination over Europe. And then, of course, in the two world wars, there's a number of books written where it shows that the papacy's allegiance towards Germany in that. But they were able to fight that off. They were able to stand independent to that. Even though the push from the Roman Catholic was to bring that country back into their fold, they were able to stand separate. So what's happened? Well, in 1909, there's this picture here. The Tories saw that the menace really to society was this doctrine of socialism, this doctrine of oneness, this doctrine of incorporation. And here we get to the woman on the beast who's able to influence the people and the kings. We're speaking about here in Revelation 17. This doctrine of socialism and of inclusion. But this is how the Tories or the leaders in UK at the time saw it, they saw it as throttling their country, as choking. And that picture there is Britannia again, choking Britannia, choking that symbol of their independence and of their power. Here we've got another little image here of the papal octopus. Tyranny, hindrance, corruption, superstition, evil, tentacles which just can spread out and work amongst the ruling parties to bring its own means back. So the cartoonists, the newspapers, the ruling powers, they can all see where this doctrine is going. Well, the young people of the UK have drunk it. And that's what that vote was saying when you see that so many of the younger generation wanted to stay with the EU. They felt the power of oneness. While Catholics is now 38% in the EU, Catholicism has been spread worldwide now. And the numbers of Catholics amongst the whole world nations has increased. That's the spreading of her doctrine. That's the spreading of her teachings. Well, the Age says, according about this Brexit, that Europe's new nationalism is here to stay. And it's an interesting comment because it's not just the nationalism of the UK here that we're talking about, but it's nationalism now within the EU itself that's being questioned. And that's why the EU leaders want to be so quick to pounce on the fact that Britain, you're out, and let's consolidate who stays in. Because individual nationalism can't work within the boundaries of the EU. But how bizarre that the very thing that was set up to squash this nationalism, through its overarching bureaucracy, has actually caused nationalism to swell back up. So what's our expectation then as far as Britain and Bible prophecy? Well, you turn to Ezekiel 38. I won't spend very long in here. This is a very well looked at prophecy in Christadelphian circles. Perfectly placed to show us that it's in the latter days, not only because in verse 8 and verse 16 of Ezekiel 38 it mentions the latter days, but in chapter 37 it speaks about the return of the nation of Israel to its land. A nation who didn't have a land from AD 70 right through until 1948. So it speaks about their remarkable return. Places it from 1948 onwards, doesn't it? And then in chapter 40 onwards, we get this picture of the kingdom, or the temple from which God's kingdom will rule the earth and become that place that people will flow up to worship him. Jammed in between that is this prophecy of Ezekiel 38 and 39. A prophecy that speaks about a confederacy of Europe that we'll look at in just a tick. Before we get into looking at that, in verse 13, we want to focus on Britain's part of this. So picture in your mind, before we go further into this prophecy, a great confederacy of Europe which is coming down, a focus on the nation of Israel, and there's another group of nations that stand against this great European confederacy. That group of nations is in verse 13. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish with all the young lions thereof shall say unto this great confederacy, art thou come to take a spoil? Now this is where Britain fits into this prophecy. Now I said before, when Christadelphians heard about the Brexit, they didn't get excited about looking at Britain. They just wanted to know really more what's going to be the repercussions in Europe, because there's so much about Europe in Bible prophecy. But here's a little window that shows us about where the UK and where the British Isles will stand. Because here, mixed up in the merchants of Tarshish with all the young lions, is the symbolism of the British Isles. The British Isles were a part of trading in the time even back to Solomon. It was used as the source, or it was the source of tin. Herodotus speaks about it here in 445 BC, but you see down here, the British mines mainly supplied the glorious adornment of Solomon's temple. So with Phoenicia, Solomon worked together with them and their boats, and they went out on these expeditions that would come back, and the iron that came back was used in the building of Solomon's temple. Here's a number of quotes that you can get off me afterwards that mention or references to Tarshish. She was a trading power. They work together as communities to get and resource their different products and then to work it on the markets. It's exactly what Britain is built on. As with ancient Tyre, Britain built an empire based upon trade. The East Indies route, India, down here in Canada and Australia. All these, if you can't see it, but if you look closely, there's a whole lot of trading routes everywhere right around the world. We're a product of the trading and exploration of the British Isles. Australia is. We're part of that Commonwealth. It was built upon trade. Its symbolism as a lion, or as the lion of young lions, is seen in many different things. Here we had the lion next to Britannia, the lion representing the power of the UK. Here we have in World War I, the lion standing up and calling the young cubs to enlist in the battle. Here we have a response here to, I think that one's World War II, when Britain declared war on August 1914 is the Great War. So that's World War I. But here, this is from a picture of when Rosie and I went to London, actually, on the gates of Buckingham Palace. The symbol is two lions. She stands as a lion, and the Commonwealth and those that are a part of her empire are the young cubs that are responding to a lion. It fits perfectly, this little description here, doesn't it, of Tarshish, a trading power, who underneath it has all these young lions. So how does this affect then our view on Christ's return? Well, in the early verses here of Ezekiel chapter 38, we get mention of a number of nations who are going to form an allegiance. So here we've got Gog, Magog. Sorry, I'll read this first one. The word of Yahweh come unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face toward Gog, of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. So this prophecy is towards an individual called Gog. He's of a land of Magog, Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. He's a head of a land. Part of his land and power and influence is Persia, Cush and Put, Gomer and Togarmah. And they're all coming together as a great company with bucklers and shields and handling swords. It's a military allegiance. It's a confederacy of an army. And Gog, who is the head, is going to be the guard or the ruler or the protector over them. Who is it? What does it represent? Well, you go to an old map here and you see here's Israel. Here's Gomer, Magog, Togarmah, Tubal, Phut. Go to this next map, we'll go a little bit bigger. Gomer, Libya, Meshech, Rosh, Tubal. All these nations which are in red are defining for us this confederacy which is described in Ezekiel 38. It's covering most of Europe. But you'll notice here that Tarshish, which we just looked at, is in blue. It's this trading power which says, hang on, why have you come down against Israel? Are you come to take a spoil? It's separate from these other nations. That's where we see the UK. That's why we're so excited that they've stood away from Europe itself. Because the further they get away from them, the more likely this scenario of Ezekiel 38 is going to set itself up. Rosh, in Gesenius, it says that Rosh is undoubtedly the Russians, who are mentioned by Byzantine writers in the 10th century under that name, dwelling to the north. So this individual who's going to lead up this confederacy, Gog, he has influence over Russia, Magog, and an influence over Europe. Europe that spreads right across into the area of the EU. He's an individual basically which is taking control of the east and the west areas of the Roman Empire. Well, this is fantastic and fascinating. I'm so sorry this has gone over time. It will be about 5 minutes more, I reckon. This is Russia's response to the Brexit. This is the man who leads up Russia at the moment, Vladimir Putin. Russia says Brexit opens doors for new UK relations, but the US blasts the vote as Putin's victory. The US is disappointed. They see it as Putin's victory. Russia says this is awesome, this is great. Why? Because without Great Britain in the EU, no one will so zealously defend the sanctions against us. Finally, that voice which has been in the Parliament that has been speaking against us in this group of nations has been removed. Russia can have an influence now with the EU. Fascinating little thing here. A bust of Putin that has been made by the Cossacks of Putin as a Roman general. And you think, well, it's such a small little thing, and it's just the Cossacks, it's just a little bust. But how come did it make all the UK papers? How come did it make the Israel papers and half of the European papers? One little bust. A bust that is made for them to immortalise Vladimir Putin as the conqueror and statesman who returned Crimea to Russia. A little bust because their leader went out and took another country which they believe was theirs as a part of the USSR. Where's Putin on it? Well, Putin makes no secret of his imperial mindset, describing the breakup of the Soviet Union as one of the history's greatest tragedies. So here we have an individual who doesn't mind looking bigger, who doesn't mind ruling greater than his own domain. And here he is now with more influence, potentially, in the nations of Europe. Well, how interesting that the very next thing that is on the table of discussion at the EU is their strategy, their new military strategy, which is believed to include plans for a controversial EU army. A thing which the UK stood against. A thing which the UK saw as a step too far, that the EU should set up a military army to protect itself against the security issues of the age and the terrorist issues of the age. So now that the Brexit has happened and the EU is out, these talks about an EU army can go forward. How can we work as member states to put our military together to be a might? That, in an environment of uncertainty, economic uncertainty. That at a time when Russia, without doubt, is definitely making fast decisions and straight decisions. We've seen it appear in Syria and remove out of Syria. We've seen Putin being able to make this facade of Russia as the helper in many scenarios. Will it be the returning together of the western and the eastern foot of the Roman Empire, standing as one, to form this confederacy which in the last days will come down against Israel and hit, once more, the stone power? So tonight we've looked at a lot, 3 different things. We've looked at the blueprint of Bible prophecy, this stone power. We've got to be in the last days. We've seen the empire of Rome has come and gone. We're living in an era where Europe is divided, 10 toes. Some nations are strong, some nations are weak. At some point, the stone power is going to come, and it's got to be soon because we're at the end of that blueprint. We had a quick look at the Brexit, and we see there really this build-up now that has to happen of national pride. They have to reinvent themselves as a merchant nation that can trade and build up that strength again. Make the connections again with the young lions. And we've seen how Europe itself now will go into a time of uncertainty, which we're sure will show many different signs that are revealed in Bible prophecy that will just show us that the return of the Lord Jesus Christ and the stone power is near. What's the lesson? What's the main thing then? Well, I had that slide up as the last one, but that one's false. That one is all about man has got problems. That one is all about what will the UK do now that it's divided from the EU. What we want you to go away with tonight is that slide. The fact that this earth and its future is in God's hands, with his purpose, with that stone power coming to set up his kingdom. And that this book that we've looked at has got has got points of identity that we can look at as far as prophecy and see how it's fitting with the current events. We can watch and we can know with certainty that our God in heaven isn't an idol. He's a real living God who is working to bring about his purpose, that kingdom that will be established on this earth. So we invite you to learn more of that, to open this book and to read about it and to speak about it and to be ready for that return. Thanks for your time.
BibleTruthAndProphecy.com is a worldwide collaboration by Christadelphians to help promote the understanding of God's Word to those who are seeking the truth about the human condition and God's plan and purpose with this earth and with mankind upon it. Bible Truth and Prophecy is part of a wider set of online resources provided by Christadelphian for establishing just how far removed the true Christian teaching of the first century apostles is from that taught by mainstream Christendom today. BibleTruthAndProphecy.com is very much a standalone website, but benefits from our vast network of sites and resources and social media. Here are just a few of the things that BibleTruthAndProphecy.com offers. We have a good number of written articles supplied to us from brothers from all over the globe. These deal with first principle issues, creation versus evolution, the inspiration of the Bible, and so much more. We have a whole section of video study series. These are studies that have been posted onto our YouTube channel, but because of the difficulty of the search feature within YouTube, we have chosen to host on Bible Truth and Prophecy. So now every video you search for within the site, you can be guaranteed that it will be of a Christadelphian nature. We also have a preaching video section where any ecclesia is invited to download and use or embed these videos within their own ecclesial websites. We also have an exhortation service where we produce 2 or 3 exhortations per week, which we then circulate to brethren and sisters in isolation. We also have an ever-growing list of approved Christadelphian sites. We also have a page of live news feeds, so you can keep up to date with all the breaking news as it happens. We also have a section for the daily readings. Each day at around midnight we publish all 3 of the daily readings, and then later on in the day we publish thought for the days, often based on all 3 portions of the daily readings. Within each daily reading post there is also a link to enable you to have the Bible chapter read to you directly. We also feature Bible in the News videos which we have produced from the Bible in the News website. We also feature Brother Don Pierce's milestone snippets, which come out approximately 3 times a week. We also feature Andy Walton's weekly World Watch and other commentaries and analysis from other brethren on world news events. You can also subscribe to the blog and be notified of posts as they happen in real time, and also subscribe to the weekly newsletter which is provided by Christadelphian Every page and post on the site has the facility to be able to leave a comment or make an observation, so please take advantage of this and let us know what you think of the site.